Breaking news from the Middle East. Google, Meta, and Microsoft have been taken as geopolitical hostages by Iran. This is not fiction. This is not conspiracy theory. This is an official threat, published in a message on the Telegram channel of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps on May 17, 2026. The message is clear and direct. Iran has announced it will charge toll fees on all submarine internet cables passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And if companies do not pay, traffic can be interrupted. Think about what this means. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and the internet of the entire world simply disappears. This is not your home Wi-Fi that went down. This is not your phone that froze. This is the backbone of global connectivity that has been cut. International banks stop working. Financial transactions freeze. Credit card payments fail. Banking systems in New York, London, Tokyo, and Brasilia stop functioning. Stock markets crash in minutes. The oil market, which drives the entire global economy, collapses. Cloud services that support entire companies disappear. Amazon Web Services goes offline. Microsoft Azure falls offline. Google Cloud, Google Search, Gmail email, everything vanishes. Meta loses control of billions of accounts. WhatsApp, used by more than 2 billion people worldwide, stops working. Instagram disappears. Facebook shuts down. The artificial intelligence that answers questions, drives cars, diagnoses diseases, runs factories, and makes decisions in milliseconds is turned off at once. This is not a technical failure. This is not a storm. This is not a programming error. This is a decision made by a country that controls one of the most strategic points on the entire planet. And the target is you. The target is your bank. The target is your job. The target is your connected life. This is happening right now in May 2026. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps declared that in the name of Iran's absolute sovereignty over its territorial waters, the country may declare that all fiber optic cables crossing the strait are subject to licenses, monitoring, and toll fees. The message warned that any disruption to these cables would cost the global economy hundreds of millions of dollars per day. The Strait of Hormuz is a waterway only 39 kilometers wide, located between Iran and Oman. 20% of all oil produced in the world passes through there. But beneath these waters, on the floor of the strait, there are submarine cables carrying billion-dollar traffic of finance and internet between Europe, Asia, and the Persian Gulf. These submarine cables are the backbone of global connectivity. They carry emails, bank transfers, stock market transactions, government communications, military communications, cloud computing data, artificial intelligence systems, streaming services, video calls, online payments, medical records, and countless other services that modern society depends on every single second. If these cables are cut, sabotaged, or interrupted, the consequences would be catastrophic. Iran has blocked the Strait of Hormuz since February 28, 2026, the first day of the joint military offensive by the United States and Israel. The Iranian government created the Persian Gulf Strait Authority to manage the strait. This authority approves ship transit and collects passage fees. Ships must provide detailed information about owner, insurance, crew members, and planned transit route. Now the same logic is being applied to submarine cables. The Iranian government wants global tech giants to comply with Iranian submarine law. Companies would be forced to pay licensing fees for cable passage and pay for repair and maintenance rights, exclusive to Iranian companies. Iranian official media has announced that traffic could be interrupted if companies do not pay. The country has even published a detailed map of submarine cables in the region. The headline about hostages is sensationalist, yes. There is no hostage taking of people, but what is happening is perhaps more dangerous. What is happening is a hostage taking of infrastructure, a hostage taking of the very backbone of global connectivity. Google, Meta, Microsoft, and Amazon are being pressured because their infrastructure depends on these cables. They are symbolic targets as U.S. big tech. The real target is you. The real target is the global economy. The real target is the digital infrastructure that modern civilization depends on. This is the opening act of a new kind of war. A war not fought with tanks and planes alone, but with cables, data, and the power to disconnect an entire world from itself. The question is no longer if Iran will use this weapon. The question is when. To understand how we arrived at this moment, we must go back to the beginning of the conflict that changed everything. On February 28, 2026, coordinated airstrikes by the United States and Israel against Iran marked the official start of a war that would shake the foundations of the Middle East. The justification was Iran's inflexibility in negotiations over its nuclear program and uranium enrichment capabilities. Iran retaliated immediately with attacks on countries throughout the region. This war has already caused thousands of deaths, primarily in Iran and Lebanon. Cities were bombed, military installations were destroyed, nuclear facilities were targeted. The world watched as the Middle East exploded into flames. But the most strategic move Iran made was not a missile attack. It was the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. On the very first day of the joint military offensive, Iran blocked the Strait of Hormuz completely. This decision sent shockwaves through the global economy. Oil prices skyrocketed. Shipping companies rerouted their vessels through longer, more expensive routes. Energy markets went into panic mode. The strategic importance of this narrow waterway became painfully clear to everyone. Since then, Iran has insisted that traffic through the strait will not return to the pre-war situation. This is not just rhetoric. This is reality. In April 2026, Iran announced it had collected the first revenues from tolls imposed on this strategic waterway. The message was clear: if you want to pass through Iranian waters, you will pay. The Iranian government formalized the creation of the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. This organization already has an official account providing real-time updates on operations in the strait. According to the specialized maritime journal Lloyd's List, the PGSA is responsible for approving ship transit and collecting passage fees. This is essentially a private toll company operating under the control of the Iranian state. Ships passing through the strait are now required to provide detailed information about their owner, their insurance coverage, their crew members, and their planned transit route. Iranian state television Press TV presented the new organization as a system designed to exercise Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. But the Iranian government did not stop at controlling ships. The logic of sovereignty and toll collection has now been extended to submarine cables. The same neighborhood where ships pay to pass is now requiring cables to pay for the right to exist beneath the waves. This escalation represents a fundamental shift in how Iran views its strategic leverage. It is no longer enough to control oil. Iran wants to control information itself. Reports have emerged that Iran may use dolphins equipped with mines in attacks on ships. The Tasnim news agency, linked to the Revolutionary Guard, has published maps of submarine cables in the region, possibly signaling targets. If ships can be attacked, if dolphins can carry mines, what prevents cables from being cut? The answer is nothing. Absolutely nothing. The war between the United States and Iran has also caused data centers belonging to Amazon Web Services in Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates to suffer damage. This is not theoretical. This is already happening. The infrastructure that supports the digital world is under attack. The blockade of the Strait of Hormuz has caused unprecedented disruption in global energy supply. Oil trading has been severely affected. Insurance costs for vessels passing through the region have skyrocketed. Some shipping companies have completely avoided the area, adding weeks to their journeys and billions to their costs. The global economy is feeling the pressure with every passing day, but the digital supply chain is even more vulnerable than the energy supply chain. Oil can be transported by alternative routes, even if more expensively and slowly. Internet traffic cannot be rerouted easily. Submarine cables are fixed infrastructure. They cannot be moved. They cannot be rerouted at will. If they are cut, if they are sabotaged, if they are interrupted, there is no backup plan. There is no alternative route that can handle the same volume of traffic. The world would experience a digital blackout of unprecedented proportions. This is the context in which the threat against Google, Meta, and Microsoft must be understood. This is not an isolated incident. This is part of a broader strategy of asymmetric warfare. Iran cannot match the United States in conventional military power. Iran cannot win a tank battle. Iran cannot win an air war, but Iran can cut the cables. Iran can disrupt the internet. Iran can hold the digital world hostage, and that is exactly what is happening right now. While the threat to submarine cables grows, diplomatic efforts to end the war have been unfolding in the shadows. The story of these negotiations reveals the complexity of the situation and why the world is walking on such fragile ground. In early May 2026, Iran made a formal proposal to end the war. This proposal included a focus on ending the conflict and reopening the Strait of Hormuz to normal traffic. The international community hoped this might be the breakthrough that would bring peace to the region. The negotiations have been taking place through Pakistani mediation. This neutral third party has been shuttling between Washington and Tehran, carrying messages and proposals back and forth. On May 9, 2026, Iran sent its response to the U.S. peace proposal through Pakistan. This diplomatic channel has become the lifeline preventing the war from escalating further. Then came the reaction that shocked the world. On May 9, 2026, United States President Donald Trump publicly rejected Iran's proposal. His words were harsh and uncompromising. Trump called the Iranian response totally unacceptable. He went further and referred to the proposal as trash. These words were not accidental. They were deliberate. They were meant to send a message to Iran and to the world. The message was clear. The United States will not accept anything less than complete Iranian surrender on key issues. Despite this harsh rejection, Trump also said that a deal was very possible. This contradiction reveals the complexity of the situation. On one hand, the United States wants to maintain maximum pressure on Iran. On the other hand, the United States does not want the war to escalate beyond control. This delicate balancing act is what keeps the world on the edge of its seat. Iran responded to Trump's criticism by defending its proposal as legitimate and generous. Iranian officials argued that their proposal addressed the core concerns of the international community while protecting Iran's sovereignty and national interests. The impasse was complete. Both sides were dug in. Neither side was willing to budge. The war continued, and the threat to submarine cables grew stronger with each passing day. The central point of disagreement remains Iran's nuclear program and uranium enrichment capabilities. The United States and Israel demand stricter limits on Iran's nuclear activities. They insist that Iran must not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons under any circumstances. Iran, on the other hand, maintains that its nuclear program is purely civilian. Tehran insists that it has the right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes, such as energy production and medical isotope manufacturing. Iran refuses to dismantle its nuclear facilities. This inflexibility on the nuclear issue was cited as the initial justification for the airstrikes by the United States and Israel in late February. The international community was divided. Some countries supported the strikes, arguing that Iran posed an existential threat to regional stability. Others condemned the strikes, arguing that diplomacy had not been exhausted. The division continues to this day. On May 17, 2026, a critical development occurred. President Trump suspended a planned attack on Iran to allow negotiations to continue. This decision came after Pakistan delivered a new peace proposal from Tehran to Washington. The suspension of the attack was a relief for the international community. It suggested that diplomacy was still possible. It suggested that the worst might still be avoided, but the truce that resulted from these negotiations is described as incredibly fragile. The ceasefire has been in effect since April 8, 2026, but anyone watching the situation closely knows that this ceasefire could collapse at any moment. One miscalculation, one miscommunication, one accidental strike could reignite the war with even greater intensity. The United States maintains a blockade on Iranian ports since April 13th. This blockade was decreed one day after the first negotiations on ending the war failed. The blockade adds economic pressure to military pressure. It is designed to force Iran to the negotiating table. It is designed to make the cost of continuing the war higher than the cost of making concessions. The Iranian government has responded to this pressure by escalating its threats. The announcement about submarine cables is part of this escalation. Iran is signaling that it has leverage beyond the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is signaling that it can hurt the global economy in ways that go beyond oil. The message to the United States and its allies is clear. If you continue to pressure us, we will pressure you back. And our pressure will hit you where it hurts most, in your digital infrastructure. The diplomatic dance continues. Proposals are made. Proposals are rejected. Negotiations continue. Proposals are made again. But the underlying tension remains. The war is not over. The threat to submarine cables is real. The danger to global digital infrastructure is growing. And the world is watching, waiting for the next move. The question hanging over everything is simple but terrifying. Will diplomacy succeed before Iran decides to act on its threat? Will the world find a way to de-escalate the situation before the cables are cut? Or will we witness the first digital blackout in human history caused by a war in the Middle East? No one knows the answer. No one can predict what will happen next. All we know is that the clock is ticking and the stakes have never been higher. To fully understand the magnitude of this threat, we must understand the technology at its core. Submarine cables are not just wires beneath the ocean. They are the nervous system of modern civilization. These cables carry more than 99% of all international data traffic. Every email sent across borders, every video call between continents, every financial transaction between countries, every cloud computing request, every streaming service, every artificial intelligence query, all of it flows through these submarine cables. There are approximately 550 submarine cables currently operating around the world. These cables form a complex network that connects every continent except Antarctica. The total length of these cables exceeds 1,300,000 kilometers. That is more than 30 times the circumference of Earth. The value of this infrastructure is incalculable. The cables passing through the Strait of Hormuz are particularly critical. These cables connect Europe to Asia, the Middle East to the rest of the world. They carry the financial traffic of the Gulf states, the technology traffic of India and China, the communication traffic of Europe and the Middle East. If these cables are cut, the disruption would be felt immediately across the entire globe. The technology itself is remarkably simple yet incredibly fragile. Submarine cables are fibers of glass thinner than a human hair, protected by layers of steel and plastic. They are laid on the ocean floor by specialized ships. Once installed, they are designed to last for 25 years or more, but they are extremely vulnerable to damage. Ship anchors can cut them, earthquakes can damage them, intentional sabotage can destroy them. In 2024, Houthi rebels in the Red Sea damaged several submarine cables by dragging anchors across them. This incident caused significant disruption to internet traffic in the region. It was a warning of what could happen if a state actor decided to target cables intentionally. Now Iran has the capability and the motivation to do exactly that. The economic impact of cutting submarine cables would be catastrophic. A study by the European Commission estimated that a one-week disruption of major submarine cables would cost the global economy between $100 billion and $200 billion. This is not including the indirect costs. This is not including the loss of trust in digital systems. This is not including the psychological impact on populations that suddenly find themselves disconnected from the world. The financial sector would be hit hardest. International bank transfers would stop, stock markets would freeze, credit card transactions would fail, cryptocurrency exchanges would become inaccessible. The entire global financial system depends on real-time communication through these cables. Without them, the financial system would collapse within hours. The technology sector would face an existential crisis. Cloud computing would be impossible. Artificial intelligence systems would stop working. Software updates would not reach devices. Security patches would not be distributed. The entire digital economy would grind to a halt. Companies that depend on cloud services would be unable to operate. Startups would disappear. Established corporations would face bankruptcy. Governments would struggle to function. Diplomatic communications would be interrupted. Military communications would be compromised. Emergency services would have difficulty coordinating. Public announcements would not reach citizens. The social contract between governments and citizens depends on the ability to communicate. Without that ability, the contract breaks down. The healthcare sector would face a crisis. Medical records stored in the cloud would become inaccessible. Telemedicine would stop working. Medical devices connected to the internet would fail. Pharmaceutical supply chains would be disrupted. Clinical trials would be interrupted. The impact on human health would be severe and potentially deadly. Education would be disrupted globally. Online learning platforms would stop working. International research collaborations would be interrupted. Academic communications would cease. Students would be unable to access their courses. Teachers would be unable to reach their students. The transmission of knowledge would be blocked. The entertainment industry would collapse. Streaming services would go offline. Video calls would stop. Social media platforms would become inaccessible. People would lose their connection to friends, family, and the outside world. The psychological impact would be severe. Depression, anxiety, and isolation would increase dramatically. The military implications are even more serious. Modern warfare depends on real-time communication. Command and control systems rely on digital networks. Intelligence gathering depends on data transmission. If the cables are cut, military operations would be severely compromised. This is why nations protect submarine cables so carefully. This is why attacks on cables are considered acts of war. Iran understands all of this. The Iranian leadership knows exactly what would happen if the cables are cut. That is precisely why the threat is so powerful. Iran does not need to actually cut the cables to achieve its objectives. The threat alone is enough to create panic, uncertainty, and pressure. The mere possibility of a digital blackout is a weapon in itself. This is the nature of 21st century warfare. It is not just about tanks and planes and missiles. It is about controlling the infrastructure that modern society depends on. It is about holding the digital world hostage. It is about demonstrating that a country can hurt the global economy without firing a single shot. Iran is demonstrating this capability right now. The irony is that the cables are technically protected by international law. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea protects submarine cables. Attacks on cables are supposed to be illegal, but international law is only as strong as the willingness of nations to enforce it. In a war zone, in a region where superpowers are fighting, international law becomes secondary to military and strategic considerations. The cables passing through the Strait of Hormuz are in international waters, but Iran controls the entrance to the strait. Iran controls the ships that pass through. Iran controls the narrative about what is happening. This gives Iran de facto control over the cables, even if de jure they are protected by international law. This is the reality of the situation. The threat is real. The capability exists. The motivation is clear. The question is not whether Iran can cut the cables. The question is whether Iran will cut the cables. And if Iran does cut the cables, the world will never be the same again. We now stand at a critical moment in human history. The decision that Iran makes in the coming weeks and months will determine whether the 21st century begins with a digital blackout or with a new era of cooperation. The stakes could not be higher. The consequences could not be more severe. The world is watching, waiting, and hoping that reason will prevail over rage. There are three possible scenarios unfolding before us. The first scenario is a peace agreement and de-escalation. In this scenario, diplomacy succeeds. The United States and Iran reach an agreement on the nuclear program. The Strait of Hormuz reopens to normal traffic. The threat to submarine cables is withdrawn. The ceasefire holds and eventually becomes a permanent peace. This is the best-case scenario. This is what the international community is hoping for. But it requires both sides to make concessions. It requires both sides to prioritize peace over pride. The second scenario is a fragile truce and prolonged hybrid warfare. In this scenario, the ceasefire holds but remains fragile. Iran maintains control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran continues to charge tolls on ships and possibly on cables. Iran uses threats to digital infrastructure as leverage. Limited attacks with drones, missiles, and asymmetric tactics continue. This would be a war of attrition, a constant risk of incidents that could cut cables, volatile oil markets, global economies under constant pressure. This scenario would be exhausting but not catastrophic. It would be a new normal of tension and uncertainty. The third scenario is escalation and attack on the cables. In this scenario, negotiations break down and tension escalates. Iran decides to sabotage or cut the cables as strategic retaliation. This could trigger a digital blackout of unprecedented proportions. Banking systems would collapse, stock markets would crash, communication systems would fail. The global economy would enter a depression. This scenario would be catastrophic. This scenario would change the course of human history. Which scenario will play out? No one knows. No one can predict with certainty. All we know is that the clock is ticking. All we know is that the stakes have never been higher. All we know is that the world is at a crossroads. The United States faces a difficult decision. Should it continue to pressure Iran militarily and economically? Or should it make concessions to avoid a catastrophic digital blackout? Should it risk escalation to protect nuclear non-proliferation? Or should it prioritize economic stability? These are not easy questions. There are no easy answers. Every option has consequences. Every option has risks. Iran faces a difficult decision as well. Should it follow through on its threat and cut the cables? This would achieve short-term leverage, but would likely trigger a massive international response. Should it maintain the threat without acting on it? This would continue pressure but would not achieve the same impact. Should it negotiate in good faith and withdraw the threat? This would ease tensions but would be seen as weakness by hardliners. These are not easy questions either. There are no easy answers here. The international community faces a difficult decision. Should it intervene directly in the conflict? Should it mediate more aggressively? Should it impose sanctions on Iran? Should it offer incentives for peace? Should it prepare for the worst-case scenario? Should it invest in backup infrastructure? These are questions that leaders around the world are asking themselves right now. What can ordinary people do? The answer is not much directly, but we can stay informed. We can demand that our leaders prioritize peace. We can support organizations working for diplomacy. We can spread awareness about the situation. We can discourage warmongering rhetoric. We can encourage dialogue and understanding. These may seem small actions, but in times of crisis, small actions matter. The technology industry is also facing a critical moment. Should companies invest in backup infrastructure? Should they diversify their cable routes? Should they develop alternatives to submarine cables? Should they prepare for the possibility of a digital blackout? These are questions that CEOs and engineers are asking themselves. The answer will determine how resilient the digital world is when the crisis comes. The financial sector is also preparing. Banks are reviewing their contingency plans. Stock exchanges are testing backup systems. Payment processors are developing offline capabilities. Insurance companies are recalculating their risk models. The financial world knows that it is vulnerable. The financial world is trying to prepare, but preparation is not the same as prevention. Governments are also preparing emergency plans. Communication protocols are being reviewed. Backup systems are being tested. Emergency response plans are being updated. National security advisors are running simulations. The worst-case scenario is being planned for, but planning is not the same as prevention either. The truth is that the world is vulnerable. The truth is that we are dependent on infrastructure that can be cut. The truth is that a small country in the Middle East can hold the entire world hostage with a single decision. This is the reality of the 21st century. This is the vulnerability of our connected world. But there is hope. There is always hope. Diplomacy has worked before. Diplomacy can work again. Leaders have made the right choices before. Leaders can make the right choices again. The world has faced crises before. The world has overcome crises before. This crisis can be overcome too, but it requires courage. It requires wisdom. It requires leadership. The headline about Google, Meta, and Microsoft being taken hostage is sensationalist, but the underlying reality is real. The threat is real. The danger is real. The stakes are real. The world is at a crossroads. The decision made in the coming weeks will echo through history. The decision made in the coming weeks will determine the future of the digital age. This is not just a story about Iran. This is not just a story about the United States. This is not just a story about technology companies. This is a story about all of us. This is a story about the world we have built. This is a story about the vulnerabilities we have created. This is a story about the choices we must make. The question is no longer whether we are connected. The question is whether we can stay connected. The question is no longer whether technology is powerful. The question is whether technology is vulnerable. The question is no longer whether war is dangerous. The question is whether digital war is more dangerous than traditional war. The answer to these questions will be written in the coming weeks and months. The answer will determine the future of our connected world. The answer will determine whether the 21st century is an era of unprecedented connection or an era of unprecedented disconnection. We are watching history being made. We are witnessing a moment that will be studied by future generations. We are living through a crisis that will define our time. The question is, what kind of history will we make? Will it be a history of peace and cooperation, or will it be a history of conflict and destruction? The choice is not ours alone. The choice belongs to leaders. The choice belongs to diplomats. The choice belongs to negotiators. But the consequence belongs to all of us. The consequence belongs to our children. The consequence belongs to the future. This is the story of our time. This is the story of the invisible hostage. This is the story of the digital weapon. This is the story of a world at the crossroads, and the next chapter is yet to be written.